Armin had always been a quiet and thoughtful man. He was the type of person who listened more than he spoke, who preferred calm evenings over noisy gatherings, and who believed that patience could solve many things. At the age of 32, when his family suggested marriage, he accepted their decision without much hesitation. He trusted their choices, and he trusted life to bring him the right partner at the right time. He never imagined that his partner would be someone like Zara, unique in every way, especially in her height, confidence, and presence. Zara, on the other hand, had lived her entire life standing out in a crowd. Wherever she went, people noticed her immediately. Some admired her, some stared, and some whispered in ways that made her uncomfortable. She had grown used to people commenting on her appearance, but inside she always wondered if there would ever be someone who looked at her without judgment. Someone who saw her as a person, rather than a topic of conversation. When her family arranged her marriage with Arman, she agreed mainly because she wanted stability. She wanted someone calm, someone who wouldn't treat her like a spectacle. She hoped Arman would be different. Their first meeting had been simple and straightforward. Arman sat quietly, while Zara answered most of the questions. The families talked. The two of them exchanged polite smiles. Arman noticed how Zara's presence filled the room, not because she spoke loudly, but because she carried a sort of strength. Zara noticed how Arman chose his words carefully, how he seemed thoughtful even in silence. There was no dramatic spark, but there was calmness, something both of them appreciated. The wedding happened soon after. The ceremony was beautiful, but the guests could not help whispering about Zara's height. Many people called her the tall bride, as if her name did not exist. Zara heard every comment, every giggle, every surprised remark. She tried to smile, pretending she did not care, but deep down she wished people could treat her normally. Arman, noticing her discomfort, stayed close to her the entire time. He didn't say much, but his presence made moments easier for her. After the wedding, they moved into a small but peaceful house. For the first few days, things felt new and hopeful. Arman treated Zara with respect. He asked her what she liked, how she preferred to organize the house, what kind of food she enjoyed. Zara appreciated these gestures. In her life, she had met many people who acted differently around her, either overly impressed or overly judgmental. But Arman was simple and steady, and she found comfort in that. Still, adjusting to married life brought challenges. Zara noticed that, even in the market, at family gatherings, or during simple walks, people stared at her. Some of them were harmlessly curious, but others were not. They whispered, pointed, or discussed her height as if she couldn't hear them. Zara tried to ignore them, but it wasn't easy. Every day, she felt a little more tired of being noticed for something she never chose and couldn't change. Arman, who had never experienced such attention in his life, tried to stay positive. He encouraged her, saying, "People talk about everything. We shouldn't let it bother us." He believed that with time, things would settle. He thought they just needed patience and more time together. Every night, when Zara looked tired or withdrawn, he gently said, "Let's try again tonight. Let's make tomorrow better." He wasn't talking about anything specific, he simply meant they should try to adjust, try to understand each other, and try to create a peaceful life despite the noise around them. But Zara's feelings were heavier than Arman realized. While Arman saw the comments as normal human behavior, Zara felt them as cuts to her confidence. She had been dealing with such comments since childhood, and she was tired of being seen before being known. She wanted to sit in a gathering without feeling like everyone was paying attention to her. She wanted to walk in public without becoming a topic. She wanted to feel normal, just once. At home, Arman began noticing small changes in her behavior. She spent more time alone in their room, avoided going out unless necessary, and spoke less than before. She still helped around the house and maintained her responsibilities, but her energy felt different, quieter, heavier. Arman tried asking if something was bothering her, but she always replied with a practiced smile. "I'm fine. Just tired." He sensed something was wrong, but he did not know how to reach into the silence she carried. One evening, when a neighbor made an unnecessary comment about Zara's height, Armin pretended not to hear it. He didn't want to make a scene. But Zara heard it, and she carried the sting back home. She went straight to her room, leaving Armin confused. That night, when he sat beside her, hoping to talk, she kept staring at the window, lost in thought. Armin gently said again, "Let's try again tonight. Let's forget today." Zara did not respond. Her silence felt heavy. Armin wondered if he had said something wrong or if she was angry. He didn't understand that Zara didn't need him to encourage her. She needed him to understand her pain, to see the world from her side. The next day, Zara woke up early as usual. She prepared breakfast, cleaned the living room, and made everything look perfect. It was her way of distracting herself. Armin noticed her trying too hard but still didn't know how to help. He wanted to say something comforting, but he didn't want to say the wrong thing. He thought giving her space might be better. But sometimes, space creates distance, and that distance was growing without either of them fully realizing it. At the same time, Zara kept thinking about her marriage. She wondered if Armin truly understood her struggles, or if he only saw what was visible from the outside. She wanted to share her feelings, but she feared sounding weak or emotional. She didn't want to worry him. So she stayed quiet, hoping things would change on their own. But silence is a heavy load to carry. And every day, it grew heavier. One evening, Armin suggested they visit his relatives. Zara hesitated, knowing she would become the center of attention again. She agreed only because she didn't want to disappoint him. As she expected, the gathering turned into a series of comments about her height. Some people joked lightly, others showed surprise, and a few simply stared without blinking. Armin tried to protect her by changing the topic, but Zara felt exposed and uncomfortable throughout the visit. By the time they returned home, Zara was emotionally exhausted. She went to their room and closed the door gently. Armin followed her a few minutes later. He could see the sadness in her eyes, and he finally understood that something needed to be addressed. He sat beside her and said softly, "I know you're upset. I want to understand." For a moment, Zara felt her eyes burn with the weight of unspoken words. She closed them, trying not to cry. Armin waited patiently. After a long silence, she finally whispered, in a tired and shaky voice, "I can't take this any longer." Those words stayed in the air like a shadow. They held pain, exhaustion, and years of silent struggle. Armin felt a sudden ache in his heart. He realized how deeply she had been hurting, without ever telling him. That moment changed everything. It didn't fix the problem, but it opened a door to understanding, a door they had never stepped through before. After Zara whispered those painful words, the house felt different. It wasn't loud, but there was a quiet heaviness that both of them could feel. Armin didn't sleep much that night. He kept thinking about what she said, replaying her soft voice in his mind. "I can't take this any longer." He didn't know exactly what she meant, but he understood that she was suffering far more than he had realized. The next morning, Zara behaved as usual. She woke up early, prepared breakfast, and organized the house. But she moved slowly, as if her thoughts were holding her back. Armin watched her carefully, noticing the small moments where she paused and sighed without realizing it. She looked tired, not just physically, but emotionally. Armin wanted to talk to her, but he didn't want to pressure her. He thought maybe she needed time to settle her thoughts. Still, he couldn't pretend everything was normal. When Zara placed a cup of tea in front of him, he gently said, "If you want to talk, I'm here." Zara gave a small smile, the kind of smile people use when they don't want to worry others. "I know," she said quietly, and then walked away to continue her work. But the truth was that she didn't know how to explain her feelings. How could she describe years of silent pressure? How could she explain something that felt simple to others but heavy to her? She felt like she had no words for what she carried inside. Later that afternoon, Zara had to go to the nearby market. She didn't want to go, but they needed groceries. As she walked down the street, she could feel the familiar looks following her. Some people stopped talking just to stare. Kids tugged at their parents' clothes, pointing at her. A few men from across the road whispered something and laughed. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last, but every time it hurt her a little more. Zara walked faster, kept her eyes down, and tried to ignore everything. She wished she could disappear. She wished she could stand in one place without feeling like people were judging her. She wished someone would see her as a normal person, not as a topic of discussion. When she returned home, she placed the grocery bags on the counter and sat down for a moment. Her hands shook slightly, and she felt an ache deep inside her chest. She didn't cry, but she felt the tears wanting to come. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to hold herself together. Armand noticed her quietness and came closer. "Everything okay?" he asked gently. Zara nodded, even though everything inside her said otherwise. She didn't want to burden him. "Just tired," she said softly. Armand didn't push her. He simply nodded, but he couldn't stop worrying. He began to realize that her silence wasn't just a simple mood, it was something deeper. She was withdrawing, slowly distancing herself from the world outside and the world inside their home. And Armand felt helpless. Days passed like this. Zara kept doing her responsibilities, but her energy faded bit by bit. She stayed in her room longer, avoided going out, and barely spoke during meals. Armand tried small things to help, cleaning the dishes, bringing her tea, sitting beside her quietly, but nothing seemed to lift her spirits. One evening, Armand suggested they go for a walk together. "Just a small walk," he said. "Maybe it will help clear your mind." Zara didn't want to go, but she agreed because she didn't want to discourage him. She put on her shoes and followed him outside. The streets weren't too crowded, but even a few stairs made Zara uncomfortable. They walked side by side, and Armand tried to make small conversation, but Zara only nodded or gave short replies. She kept her gaze straight ahead, trying to block out the outside world. At one point, a group of teenagers passed by. They looked at Zara with wide eyes and whispered to each other. One of them said something quietly, but Zara heard it. Armand heard it too. He felt anger rise inside him, but he didn't know what to do. He didn't want to start an argument with strangers, but he also didn't want Zara to feel hurt again. Zara walked a little faster, clearly wanting to go home. Armand followed her quietly, feeling frustrated and powerless. When they reached home, Zara went straight to her room once again. Armand stood in the living room, staring at the floor, feeling lost. He wanted to protect her from everything, from the stares, the whispers, the comments, but he couldn't. He didn't know how to shield her from something she had been facing her entire life. The next morning, Armand called his mother to ask for advice, but didn't reveal too many details. He simply said, "Zara seems upset these days. I don't know how to help." His mother listened and replied, "Every person has a silent struggle. Maybe she just needs time. Maybe she needs someone to listen without trying to give solutions." Those words stayed in Armand's mind. He realized that he had been trying to fix everything instead of understanding her feelings. Maybe she didn't want solutions. Maybe she just wanted someone to hear her. Meanwhile, Zara's emotional weight kept growing. She began waking up with a feeling of heaviness in her chest, as if every day was becoming harder to face. She avoided mirrors, avoided gatherings, avoided anything that reminded her of how different she looked. She felt trapped inside her own thoughts. After several days of silence between them, Zara sat alone on the edge of the bed one night, her hands clasped together tightly. She thought about her life before marriage and after marriage. She wondered why she felt even more insecure now than before. She wondered why people couldn't simply accept her as she was. She wondered if she would ever feel comfortable in her own skin. Armand noticed her sitting alone and approached her quietly. He sat beside her, leaving a little space so she wouldn't feel pressured. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Armand softly said, "I want to understand you. I really do. Please tell me what's hurting you. Zara's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. She didn't want to break down. She didn't want to appear weak, but something inside her finally began to give way. She took a slow breath and whispered, I feel tired. Tired of everything. Tired of being looked at like I'm strange. Tired of pretending it doesn't hurt. Tired of feeling like I don't belong anywhere. Armin listened quietly, his heart aching with every word. He had never heard her speak so openly. He didn't interrupt. He didn't tell her to be stronger. He simply listened. Zara continued, I know I shouldn't care what people say. I know I should ignore them, but I've been hearing these things since I was a child. It gets heavy. It gets lonely. I try to act confident, but inside, I feel small. I feel tired of fighting the same battle every day. Armin felt tears in his eyes too, but he kept them hidden. He gently placed his hand over hers. I didn't know you felt this much, he said softly. I should have listened earlier. Zara shook her head. It's not your fault. I didn't tell you. I didn't want to be a problem. You're not a problem, Armin said firmly, his voice full of sincerity. You're my partner. I'm supposed to be with you through everything. For the first time in many days, Zara felt comforted. She felt seen. She felt heard. It didn't remove her pain, but it made it a little lighter. That night, they talked for a long time. Zara shared pieces of her past she had never told anyone, not even her closest friends. She talked about her school days. When students made jokes about her height, she talked about teachers who used her as an example without realizing it embarrassed her. She talked about family members who thought they were being funny but made comments that stayed with her for years. Armin held every word carefully, understanding how much she had carried in silence. He realized how strong she truly was, not because she looked strong, but because she had survived so many emotional wounds. Their conversation didn't solve everything, but it created a small bridge between them, something they both had been missing. It was the first step toward healing. For the next few days, Armin changed the way he approached everything. He made sure to ask Zara how she felt, not just how her day was. He gave her space when she needed it, but stayed close when she seemed lonely. He didn't give empty encouragement anymore. Instead, he gave understanding. Zara slowly began to feel a little lighter. She still struggled with the outside world, but she no longer felt alone inside the house. She began spending more time in the living room, sitting beside Armin, watching TV, or simply talking softly. Their relationship, once quiet and distant, began to warm up again. But the pain wasn't over. It was only the beginning of change, slow, fragile, and new. The days that followed their long conversation were different for both Armin and Zara. Something had changed between them, something small but important. Instead of walking around each other with quiet confusion, they began noticing each other's emotions more clearly. Armin started to understand the heaviness behind Zara's silence, and Zara began to feel a little safer sharing her feelings with him. But healing is never simple. Even with understanding and care, the past still whispers, and old wounds do not fade in a day. Zara tried her best to open up more, but there were still moments when her insecurities took control. One morning, she stood in front of the mirror tying her hair, and a familiar sadness washed over her. She saw a tall woman staring back, one who had spent her life being stared at, judged, and discussed. Even in her own home, she sometimes felt like a stranger to herself. She touched her reflection gently and whispered, "Why can't I just feel normal?" Armin walked in at that moment, carrying a tray with tea. He paused when he saw Zara standing still, her expression distant. "Tea?" he asked softly. Zara blinked and forced a small smile. "Thank you." She tried to hide her emotions, but Armin could sense something was wrong. He didn't pressure her. Instead, he simply placed the tray on the table and sat beside her. He had learned that silence could be comforting when it held understanding. Eventually, Zara sat next to him, holding the warm cup in both hands. The heat calmed her slightly. Armin watched her carefully. You don't have to pretend, he said quietly. Zara looked down. I'm trying, she whispered. I know, Arman replied. And I'm here. Those two words, simple yet sincere, meant more to her than anything else. She nodded slowly, her eyes softening. Later in the afternoon, Zara decided to clean the house to distract herself. While she worked, she thought about her childhood, about how she always walked into a classroom knowing she would be the tallest. She remembered the times kids teased her without thinking, the teachers who made jokes in front of the whole class, the relatives who told her she would never find someone who could accept her. Those memories stayed deeply inside her, shaping her fears. In the middle of dusting a shelf, she suddenly stopped. She realized she had never shared these memories with Arman. She had kept them hidden, thinking no one needed to know. But maybe if she shared them, things would feel lighter. When Arman came home from work, she gathered her courage. Can we talk? She asked softly. Arman immediately nodded and sat with her in the living room. Zara took a deep breath and began telling him everything, not in anger, not in tears, but in a calm, steady voice. She told him about her first day of school, when the teacher introduced her as the tall one. She told him how she stopped going to sports day because people kept pointing at her height. She told him how she avoided weddings because guests always made comments about her future. Arman listened without interrupting. His eyes softened with every word. He had never known the depth of her pain. He had never realized how much she had silently carried all these years. When she finished speaking, she looked at him with uncertainty, as if waiting to see if he would judge her too. Instead, Arman gently reached for her hand and held it firmly. I'm sorry you went through all of that, he said, his voice filled with emotion. You didn't deserve any of it. Zara looked down at their hands and felt a warmth spreading through her chest. Arman's sincerity felt like a soft blanket around her, protecting her from years of hurt. In the days that followed, Zara began sharing more of herself. One evening, she told Arman how she used to stand on tiptoes when taking photos as a child, something most kids didn't need to do. Another day, she told him about her dreams of becoming a designer, but how people discouraged her, saying she would stand out too much in a room full of others. Arman listened to everything, and each time, his respect for her grew. He began to realize how strong she had been, how she had survived each hurtful moment and still built a life for herself. He admired her resilience, her sensitivity, her courage to keep going despite so many wounds. Their conversations slowly strengthened their bond. Zara, who once stayed quiet and reserved, now spoke more freely. She didn't smile all the time yet, but she smiled a little more than before. Arman, who once didn't know how to help, now understood the value of listening and being present. Around this time, Arman decided to take Zara somewhere peaceful, a park on the edge of the town where very few people went. He wanted her to feel the world without judgment, even if only for a short while. They went in the evening when the sun was soft and golden. Zara felt the fresh air touch her face gently. There were only a few people walking far away, and no one was staring at her. They walked slowly through the park, and for the first time in weeks, Zara felt relaxed. She looked at the trees, the sky, the quiet paths, and thought, maybe peace is possible. Arman watched her face and felt relieved to see even a small spark of calmness. As they walked, Arman said, I want you to know something. Your height doesn't bother me. I don't even think of it that way. When I look at you, I see someone strong, someone kind, someone thoughtful. Not what others see. Zara looked at him, surprised. No one had ever said something like that to her so openly. Do you really mean that? She asked gently. Arman smiled. I do. Zara felt something heavy lift off her chest. She didn't expect those words, but they touched her deeply. She realized that part of her pain came from waiting for someone who would look at her beyond appearances. And now, she had someone who did. As the days continued, Zara slowly began building small habits that made her feel better. She started reading again, especially books that made her feel calm. She tried practicing small hobbies at home, drawing simple designs, baking new recipes, organizing her plants. These little activities gave her a sense of purpose, something beyond just dealing with her insecurities. One evening, while Armin was reading a newspaper, Zara sat beside him and showed him a small sketch she had drawn: a flower with long, graceful petals. "Do you like it?" she asked shyly. Armin looked at it with genuine admiration. "It's beautiful," he said, "just like the person who made it." Zara felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. She looked down, smiling softly. It had been a long time since she felt appreciated without conditions. But even with these positive changes, Zara still struggled with going out in public. One day, they had to attend a family dinner. Zara felt nervous again. Afraid of comments, afraid of looks, afraid of feeling like she didn't belong. But this time, Armand held her hand firmly as they entered the house. He stayed with her throughout the gathering, speaking for her when she felt uncomfortable, guiding conversations away from her height, and standing close whenever she felt anxious. Zara noticed his silent support, and it made her feel stronger. She wasn't alone anymore. She had someone who understood her and stood beside her without hesitation. When they returned home that night, Zara felt exhausted but grateful. She sat on the sofa and let out a long breath. Armand sat beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked. Zara nodded slowly. "I'm trying," she said. "And it feels a little easier now." Armand smiled softly. "That's enough," he said. "We'll take it one step at a time." Their relationship, once filled with misunderstandings, was now becoming a space of healing. Zara began to realize that she didn't have to face the world alone. She could share her fears, her insecurities, her dreams, and Armand would listen. He wouldn't judge, he wouldn't laugh, he wouldn't walk away. For the first time in her life, she felt truly accepted. One night, after a long day, Zara sat quietly beside Armand. She looked at him and said, "Thank you for staying with me through all of this." Armand gently tilted his head. "You don't have to thank me. This is what love means." Zara felt her eyes soften with emotion. Love, something she never fully believed she deserved, was now blooming gently in her life. Maybe things would not become perfect overnight. Maybe the world would not stop staring. Maybe insecurities would still return from time to time. But now, she had someone to face all of it with. And that alone made her feel stronger than she had ever felt before. The days continued to pass, and slowly, life in Armand and Zara's home began to feel warmer, softer, and more peaceful than before. Nothing had changed suddenly. Instead, it changed gently, like morning light spreading across a quiet room. Their conversations became deeper. Their understanding of each other became clearer. And their trust grew without either of them forcing it. Zara still had moments of insecurity, but she no longer carried them alone. Armand still worried for her, but now he knew how to support her without overwhelming her. One morning, Zara woke up feeling lighter than usual. She stretched her arms, walked to the window, and opened the curtains to let the early sunlight in. She watched the sky slowly turning blue and felt a calmness she hadn't felt in months. She realized she was beginning to breathe again, not the shallow breaths of fear, but the steady breaths of someone who was healing. When she walked to the kitchen, she found Armand already making tea. He looked up and smiled. "Good morning," he said gently. "Good morning," Zara replied, her voice softer but brighter. Armand noticed something different in her tone and expression. She looked more relaxed, more present. He didn't ask her why, he simply appreciated the moment. They sat together at the table, drinking tea quietly. For the first time in a long while, the silence felt peaceful instead of heavy. Later in the day, Zara decided to go outside to water the plants near the front gate. Before, she used to rush through it, worried someone might walk by and stare. But today, she took her time. She felt the sunshine on her face, heard the birds chirping, and allowed herself to enjoy the moment. A few neighbors walked by, but instead of feeling panic, she simply nodded politely. She didn't feel completely fearless yet, but she felt braver than before. When Armand stepped out to join her, he noticed how calmly she stood outside. He didn't say anything aloud, but his heart filled with quiet pride. It felt like witnessing the first steps of spring after a long winter. In the afternoon, they sat together in the living room. Zara showed Armin a new design she had drawn. It was a simple sketch of a tall, graceful tree with long branches reaching upward, as if embracing the sky. Armin studied the drawing carefully and nodded with appreciation. "It's beautiful," he said with sincerity. "You should draw more." Zara smiled shyly. "I like drawing. It makes me feel peaceful." "Then do it," Armin encouraged. "Do whatever makes you feel alive." These small words mattered to Zara more than Armin realized. She had spent so much of her life being discouraged that hearing even a simple encouragement felt like opening a door she didn't know was locked. Over the next few weeks, Zara began trying new things. She started reading more books, experimenting with new recipes, organizing small corners of the home in creative ways, and even writing little notes about her feelings. Armin always supported her without making her feel pressured. One evening, while Zara was cooking, Armin approached her from behind and said, "Some people from my office are having a small dinner this weekend. I want to go, but only if you feel comfortable joining." Zara paused. Just the idea of going to a social gathering made her nervous. She remembered all the past moments when people stared, commented, or compared her. But then, she thought about everything she had been learning about herself recently. She didn't want her fears to control her forever. She looked at Armin and asked softly, "Will you stay with me the whole time?" Armin smiled gently. "Always." Zara nodded slowly. When the weekend came, Zara felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. She took extra time to get ready, not to impress anyone, but to feel confident in herself. As she stood in front of the mirror, she reminded herself of all the small victories she had gained recently. She had faced her fears before and survived. She could do it again. Armin noticed her nervousness and held her hand before they left the house. "We'll go together," he said. "And if at any moment you feel uncomfortable, we'll leave." "There's no pressure." Zara nodded gratefully. When they arrived at the dinner, Zara felt that familiar wave of attention fall on her. People looked at her with curious eyes, surprised expressions, and whispering lips. But this time, she didn't shrink. She stood tall, not because she wanted to impress anyone, but because she was learning to accept herself. Armin stayed beside her the whole evening, introducing her to co-workers, guiding conversations, and giving her reassuring glances whenever she seemed unsure. Slowly, Zara relaxed. She even spoke softly to a few people, answered their polite questions, and smiled when someone complimented her drawing hobby after Armin mentioned it. For the first time in a long time, Zara realized that she could exist in a crowd without feeling small inside. After the dinner, when they walked back to their car, Zara let out a long breath she didn't realize she had been holding. "You did amazing," Armin said proudly. Zara looked at him with surprise. "Really?" "Yes," Armin replied. "I'm proud of you." Zara felt warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you for being with me." They drove home in quiet comfort, and when they reached the house, Zara sat down on the sofa, exhausted but happy. She looked at Armin and said, "I feel different today." Armin nodded. "You're healing." Zara smiled softly. "Maybe I am." In the following days, Zara started taking small steps outside more often. Sometimes, she went to the nearby park alone. Sometimes she visited the shop without rushing. Sometimes she even greeted neighbors without fear. Armin watched all these changes with admiration, feeling grateful that their bond had not broken under pressure but instead had become stronger. One night, after a long and peaceful day, they sat together on the balcony. The sky was filled with stars, and a soft wind moved through the air. Armin looked at Zara, who was resting her head on the back of the chair, looking calmer than he had ever seen her. He spoke softly, repeating the same words he used to say when things were difficult. But this time, he said them with warmth instead of worry. "Let's try again tonight," he whispered. Zara turned to look at him. But unlike before, there was no sadness in her eyes, only understanding, trust, and quiet strength. She gave a gentle smile and replied, "Yes, we can." Those simple words held the entire journey of their struggles and healing. They represented the bridge they had built together slowly, patiently, and lovingly. In the days that followed, their home became a place of comfort rather than silence. They spoke more openly, laughed more freely, and trusted each other more deeply. Zara wasn't completely free of her insecurities, but she no longer fought them alone. Armin wasn't able to solve everything, but he no longer avoided the hard conversations. Together, they found a rhythm that worked for them. One afternoon, months later, Zara stood in the same park where Armand first brought her to help her feel calm. This time, she walked confidently. She didn't hide behind her hair. She didn't avoid the open spaces. She breathed in the air and felt free. Armand walked beside her and said, "You're becoming stronger every day." Zara smiled calmly. "I'm learning to accept myself, and I'm learning to live." Armand squeezed her hand. "You're not alone." "I know," Zara whispered, her voice steady. "And that's what makes everything easier." 2. Their journey didn't end with perfection. It ended with growth, steady, gentle, and real. And sometimes, that is all anyone needs. A partner who listens, a heart that understands, a voice that softly says, "Let's try again tonight," and another voice that finally replies, with courage, "Yes, we can."